You're being told you're not good enough. Why can't you sit still? Why are you still talking? Why can't you sit down in class? Why can't you concentrate?
Whether you do it by the sword or the feather, the outcome is going to be the same.
Men that are super opinionated, super like, everyone's a pussy and everyone's this and this and, you know? Deep down, there's a little boy inside who's afraid.
Do you feel like you now have total mental performance, or do we ever get to that point where we have it?
So with that, my success has been...
Kyran, with your ADHD diagnosis, did that bring you solace or suffering?
Oh, it was the best thing ever. Yeah, it changed the whole game because I spent my whole life with undiagnosed ADHD up until my early 20s wondering why I felt broken. Why am I so broken? Like, why can't I think like other people? Why can't I respond like other people? Why am I so anxious and afraid and insecure? And so the diagnosis was almost like a spiritual and psychological and neurological chiropractic adjustment. And I was like, oh, cool. Because once I understood it, I dived into white papers, I dived into books, I hired an ADHD coach. Everything changed. I left my software sales career behind. I restudied as a therapist and went into the world and what I do now. So the diagnosis changed my life, but it caused a lot of suffering right before.
What was that suffering from?
Well, if you think about ADHD, so you're constantly in an environment, particularly when it's undiagnosed, where you're being told you're not good enough. Why can't you sit still? Why are you still talking? Why can't you sit down in class? Why can't you concentrate? I remember in exams looking at as a child, like your SATs and your key stage ones and whatever. I remember looking at the piece of paper and all the words would be jumbled and all I could hear was like the clock ticking on the wall because it was so quiet and my clothes didn't feel comfortable and all of my exams were like that. So I just didn't apply myself. And my teachers would say, Kyran, you're so intelligent. You should be getting A's. Why are you getting C's and D's? This is not good enough. And I internalized that as I'm not good enough. So you get this whole story of not enoughness. So then you get this chip on your shoulder. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to show you how good I am at everything. That played out for me in various different ways, not the nicest of ways either.
Do you think that nowadays the self-diagnoses of ADHD, maybe perpetuated by social media, is something where it's genuinely a positive, where people are starting to understand ADHD more? Or do you feel like perhaps it's now starting to, in a way, blunt the importance of what that diagnosis is? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it was definitely 100% underdiagnosed, particularly in the UK, and it's underdiagnosed in women, particularly as well. So the estimates for the UK population of having ADHD was between 4 and 5%. But when I got diagnosed, only 1% of the population was diagnosed, right? So if you look at that across 60 million, that's a hell of a lot of people that are roaming around, raw dogging their ADHD without a better phrase. So with that, I say that because somebody texted me that this morning. I've been raw dogging my ADHD all day, my life, and it was in my mind. But essentially, you had a population that was underdiagnosed, and social media basically brought forward, these are people like me too. So a lot of people leaned into that. Now, we've also got another challenge, which is a lot of the traits of ADHD you might have, but your brain actually isn't wired that way. And that's coming through social media, that's coming through apps, that's coming through distraction, attention spans are plummeting. So there's a lot of people that display some ADHD symptoms, but actually hasn't been to the psychiatrist to go and get it diagnosed. If you go to a psychiatrist, they'll ask you questions about your childhood. They'll ask your parents. If you have a partner, they'll ask you your partner. And it shouldn't really be a big surprise. Like when I got diagnosed, everybody went, oh, that makes so much sense. And that actually made me really angry. It actually made me quite upset because I felt everyone had abandoned me. It was like, why did no one say, you know? My mum, I got flagged for it. My mum was afraid that they'd put me on ADHD meds and that would cause a long-time damage. So she didn't put me into the assessment.
Oh, wow.
So I love her for that because she had my best interests at heart. But it also really hurt me because there was a lot of things that I didn't get addressed that then led to psychological issues, led to mental health issues, substance and abuse issues in my teenage years that particularly really hurt. So to answer the question directly, I think the net effect is more positive than negative, but I don't think people should be diagnosing themselves. They should be speaking to experts. Now, on the NHS in the UK, it's going to take a long time. For me, I'm the kind of guy, if I've got an inkling of something, I'll just pay privately and I'll just go straight to the source and I'm like, right, let's sort this out right now and get it done. Not everyone's in that position. So if you're listening to the podcast and you can't do that, then there is something called, I think it's the DSM-5, I believe, which is essentially the diagnostic tool for you to kind of get an early indication of where you are. But speak to a doctor, like a licensed psychiatrist.
And with the reference there to the addictions that you said that you struggled with as a result of not being medicated, could you explain a little bit about the role that ADHD and addictions have in combination together, but then also where medication can support or counteract that being as severe as it would be otherwise?
Yeah, so I'm not an addiction counselor and I'm also not a psychiatrist. So I can't necessarily speak on the specific medications as to how that works with the brain and ADHD in the brain. But what I can say is a really overly simplified metaphor, right? Like, it's not the science. This is just an oversimplification. But think of an ADHD as getting half the amount of dopamine as a normal person. And if you're getting half the amount of dopamine, it means what you need to, insofar as stimulus, to be just as motivated or interested in something has to be a hell of a lot higher. So ADHD is love extremes. That might be jumping out of planes, that might be traveling around the world, that might be going into highly risky businesses. So with the addiction loop, you're constantly chasing and self-medicating this. How do I feel enough? How do I stay stimulated? So when you have something like a substance, and it doesn't just have to be substances, I got addicted to work because in software sales it's a highly high dopamine world, right? You pitch your product. First of all, you book a meeting, very hard. Then you pitch your product, and then they buy it, and then you get paid in commission, and your income's up, and it's a down. And it's a really addictive cycle. It's really fun, really scary, really difficult, really anxious. Really, I'm the man, and I'm a pauper, and then I'm the king, and then I'm the pauper again. Feast and famine style. So you're constantly chasing this dopamine spike. But what's also interesting is if you have half the amount of dopamine than a normal person, when you do things like alcohol and drugs and things that eventually drop your dopamine, you actually have a quarter of what a normal person has. So then there's more anxiousness and stress and fear and all of these loops. So then guess what? You go and get on it again, or you go back to work, or and that's the scary loop that can happen with addiction and ADHD.
So you found yourself going through that journey.
Yeah, it was like everything. First, it started with boxing, so an addiction to winning fights, and that was my thing. I had to beat people up. Then there was food, because in boxing, you're cutting weight all of the time, like all of the time. I was a teenager. I think I was like 13, 12 or 13, making my first weight cut, like trying to lose weight, you know? So then when you starve yourself of food and highly processed, sugary, fatty food as well, and then you have a fight and then you get all the dopamine because like, I don't need to cut weight anymore. So you eat all of this food. So you basically train yourself to have an eating disorder. That's what I did. I got addicted to food. So first, it was actually Xbox was my first real addiction. It was like my way of escaping, and it was something I was really good at when I was a kid. Then it was the boxing, and then it was software sales, and then it was MDMA, and then it was partying, and then it was all of those loops. And then I got and porn and sex. That was another thing I got hooked on. Something that a lot of men struggle with, particularly ADHD men, is getting stuck in those loops. So it took a lot of work for me to really break that through. But once I understood, this is the ADHD, and I started reading the white papers and I started reading various different books, it all made sense. And that's not to say I didn't struggle with, it wasn't just like, everything's fine, but I understood the root cause and I was able to work on, it wasn't only ADHD, there's a lot of trauma in there, little t trauma that was contributing towards that.
First time I've heard that, little t trauma.
Yeah, we got capital T trauma and then you got a little t trauma.
I don't want to ask the definition of little t versus big T.
You want to hear it?
Well, let me know. I want to know how big my T for trauma is.
Okay, so the thing people get wrong with trauma is I hear this from clients all the time. I don't have any trauma, right? Because they're assuming child abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. They're assuming some really, dark things. But trauma doesn't have to be, a big newsline event. It could just be years of having a parent just erode at your confidence, always putting you down, always trying to get at you. It might be a bully at school that was bullying you for years. It might just be a teacher just said one or two things and they just stuck with you. And that was, air quotes, evidence of your not enoughness. So capital C trauma is, yeah, it's, the serious events that are highly illegal and highly dangerous and grief and these things. But little C trauma are more the day-to-day things where, yeah, but it weren't that bad. Yeah, but that child doesn't know the difference between capital C trauma and little c trauma. It just knows I'm not enough. So that's kind of the difference between those two.
So you've got to this point now after having studied the inner textures of so many people's minds as well as your own. And I'm wondering, do you feel like you truly know yourself now and total mental performance, that's what you do, the name of your business. Do you feel like you now have total mental performance, or do we ever get to that point where we have it?
Okay, well, first you got to start with definitions, right? So, the definition of total mental performance, if you actually just look at the linguistics, total, all, mental, mind, performance, the ability to perform when you need to perform, right? So, total mental performance has quite a narrow band insofar as do you show up at work or do you show up in your sports or in your relationships and perform, which is quite fun because all of my work is working with business owners and execs to make more money in less time with less stress. And that starts through the mind. So that's a very simple frame, which is how do I accelerate somebody's success and help them love the journey more? So with that, my success has been accelerating over the years and I've been enjoying the journey more and I've become less stressed and more calm. So I've been moving more towards that objective, certainly. But then I like thinking bigger than that, which is how do you carve out an existence that is so exciting and so fulfilling that if money didn't exist, you'd do it every single day of the week. So for myself, I don't think you ever really achieve it. I think it's like a horizon, like your goals is like a horizon and you look at the horizon, you go, that's where I want to be. And you can choose to be unhappy until you get there, or you can choose to be happy and still aim for that line. But what happens with horizons? You walk closer and then the line keeps moving forward further away. And you're like, why can't I be happy yet? Why can't I be happy yet? So for me, it's like, well, what are a few lines before the horizon? How can you get there in a more smooth, calm, effortless way and actually enjoy it and not take the setbacks so personal, I don't know if that directly answers the question, but I think it kind of gives you a frame of what I think.
No, it's exactly how I think when it comes to understanding your mind. But as your mind develops and it changes, there's more to understand, or you I suppose, unlock certain areas that you hadn't seen or realized or thought about before. And I feel like you must have had like a bit of a fast track to that with your work. Did you find, well, we briefly spoke about it before. We spoke about you having certain clients where you feel like you should have paid them to learn from them, right? So, were there any areas where you, through other people's struggles, I suppose, really learned about the demons that some people might deal with, high achievers, and you hadn't expected it or anticipated that?
Yeah. Well, if you're listening and you're like, well, what does this guy do? So I'm a mental performance consultant. So what I'm doing is I'm listening to the mind. I'm listening to the stories in the mind. And I'm looking at where are these people burning up energy that's stopping them from achieving their goals, that's slowing them down and stopping them from enjoying their existence. So with that, I'm often observing many various different people's lives from all around the world with all sorts of backgrounds. Like some of the more extreme stuff that I've seen, and if anyone's listening to this go, that's not me. This is like maybe 1% of the hundreds of clients I've worked with over the years. But I've worked with somebody that was a former slave.
Wow.
Yeah. Somebody that was kidnapped, sexual abuse, child abuse, all this stuff. And guess what? They're all pretty fucking successful. They've all done pretty well. On the flip side, I've also worked with people that are actually in more psychological distress than those clients that lived a life of, air quote, little t trauma. So where I'm always observing and like looking into people's lives, one thing I've learned is just humans are so unpredictable. This is why AI is going to come and kick our ass. This is why AI could potentially wipe us off the planet, because we're so unpredictable. It's why we like sports. You know, when you watch a football game and the one player puts in a 2-footed challenge and gets sent off, that's interesting because it's unpredictable. Robots aren't wired that way to a certain degree. So when you observe lots of people's lives, you learn a lot from their mistakes, because I'm observing all sorts of mistakes that clients are making that they wouldn't necessarily share with anyone. And as a trusted confidant in that area, I'm constantly listening and learning and observing. It's also helped me understand what kind of lives I do want to live and what kind of lives I don't want to live. So it's yeah, I have clients where sometimes at the end of the coaching, it's like, I should have paid you for that. Don't get me wrong, they got what they wanted to achieve and more. But even I'm like, wow, and I'm inherently grateful for that opportunity, to be able to help people and achieve those results. So it's always fascinating because what people present on the surface, and when you make an assumption on a human being, and when you actually listen to what that inner child is saying, and you listen to their story, you go, oh, like that person's really hurt. I see this with ultra dominant men that are super opinionated, super like, everyone's a pussy and everyone's this and this and. Deep down, there's a little boy inside that's afraid, and he's hurt, and he's upset, and he feels that this bravado, this overly masculine, dominant side that they need to project is inferiority. And you don't understand that until you study as a cognitive therapist, NLP practitioner, and the background that I've studied in. So it's just like this never-ending series of stories and realities upon which I get to see. And it's amazing. It's really cool.
I can imagine it's fascinating, and I'm curious to know whether when people come to you, and yes, I'll say this in layman's terms, but do they feel that they're broken, or do they want to just think, oh, maybe I could be better? Which side do they tend to err on?
My guys and girls now, they don't feel broken. No, they're in a place where they're like, there's two types of client that I work with, right? We'll call him Now What Nick. He's reached the plateau or he's reached the summit of the mountain, and now he's sat there going, now what? And he starts to pull away, and he's gone from playing to win to playing to not lose. And now he's a little lost, or he's a little unsure. And where he used to be so on the money, so on point, he's now just retreating a little bit. So often that's when I get a phone call, which is like, kind of feel like I've lost my spark a little bit, but objectively, everything's great. Life is great. Business is great. Finances is great. Family life is great. Everything is air quote great. Yet they feel like there's another level within them and they can't get there. So that's one type of client I work with. Then I've got Potential Peter. Potential Peter's already flying. He's winning. He's loving life. He's like, wow, I'm so grateful that I get to do this. But I'm looking for the 1%. I'm looking for the 0.5%. And I know that the mind is something that if I sharpen up all of my decisions, the way in which I live my life will be better. So typically those are the two clients that come and work with me. Earlier on in my career, it was a lot more, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm overwhelmed, I can't handle this. What do I do? I'm scared, I'm crying. But with time, I don't know what's changed. I don't know if it's just the energy I put out. I don't know if I don't know what, but now those are the two clients I tend to work with, which is quite fun. It's more of an abundance project. But what's interesting is when you dive into the psychology of what's driven them up until this point, there's still doubts and fears and insecurities that they either haven't recognized before, or if they have, they never fully addressed it. And all I'm doing is I'm listening to what is the emotional content that's burning up energy, that's wasting their time. How can we crack out of that, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. Is there anything that tends to be quite surprising? I think I had the story once of someone that went to record a podcast with Jordan Peterson, and he was just having like a yogurt beforehand, and he opened the yogurt, and then he just licked the yogurt pot lid just like any other normal person would. And the person recording the podcast with him was just like, that wasn't what I expected. Like a childlike behavior, just normal, just like everyone else is normal. So when you work with, let's say, some of these high achievers, people that you feel, you're really interested to get to know, and you, as you say, you get to know that they are just a child, or that
Mm.
on the inside they've just got certain limiting beliefs perhaps that have held them back, that can hold anyone back. Do you get often surprised at what comes up? Is there something that comes up more often than not when it comes to those limiting beliefs? I'm going to let you into a secret here, which is that my jaw hit the ground when I realized that only 7.5% of people who listen to the One in a Million podcast are actually subscribed. That means 92.5% of people are leaving the room not having committed to themselves to keep coming back to listen to information that is going to make them the most healthy, confident, successful versions of themselves. Our guests are some of the top 1% of people in the world. They are incredible, and you are learning from them for free. So the best thing that you can do for yourself is hit subscribe, because not only does it commit you to becoming a better person, but it also helps me to understand what content you want to see more of, and it supports the channel, and good karma will come your way.
No. And the reason no is because it always comes back to pretty much one thing. It's the common human neurosis, which every human being has deep down, which is being afraid that they're not lovable, not acceptable, and not enough. And our whole, well, going into, primate science, we have evolved to survive in society, to be accepted. Like, we're not as fast as the lions. We're not as strong as the elephants. We can't even swim underwater like the fish. Our ability is we can gang up on everyone and use our brains to then outthink and outfight and outlast all of our jungle counterparts, right? So, given that fact, if you are not accepted by the tribe, you're done. You're over. Especially as a baby. Like, think about it. You're so vulnerable. We're such a weird species. Like, for like years, we are not able to function alone, right? So you have to be accepted by your caregivers, and you have to be accepted by the tribe. So that's innately built an evolution within us, which is I have to be acceptable, otherwise I'm going to die. Now we have the prefrontal cortex in the brain, which is new tech, not old tech, like the limbic system. The limbic system is trying to keep you alive. So this is why we have all of these urges and all of these desires and all of this needed to be accepted and loved and liked. So every human being has got this fear of not enoughness. Now, some have worked for it. Some have just suppressed it, and they've never seen a need to go in there and try and unlock that box. But for me, when you do unlock that box, that just frees up emotional bandwidth. It just frees up energy and focus and attention. It also changes the decisions that you make, because you're doing less decisions just to be accepted, and you're doing more decisions of what you actually want. So that's at the crux of it. But I never get a knock on the door saying, hey, I know deep down that I don't feel acceptable enough or lovable. Like, can we work on that? I never get that phone call. I get a phone call of, hey, Kyran, like, I don't know, I'm trying to exit a business in the next 2 or 3 years, and I need to stay in the game and be on my A game. Can you help me with that? Yeah, sure. And one of the branches of that work eventually will be diving into that. And then we're also looking at decision making. We're looking at performance decisions. We're looking at their boardroom, like who do they have around them, and some of the more strategic side of my corporate background as well. So it's not all like these days, I would say my emotional content of my work is probably about 30%, whereas earlier on in my career probably was about 70%, 80%. So there has been a shift, after the last few years of that. But I also know when to tap, because there are moments in business where you just don't need to tap into the deeper emotional content. Let's say, like, one of my clients is a WWE wrestler, and he goes to wrestle at WrestleMania. Well, we don't need to be digging up like that stuff before WrestleMania. We need to be doing that stuff out of season, So I would say that's like the core crux of every human being. But when it comes to performing, if you nail that, you'll have more energy, and then you can harness more. And the compound effect of even having 10 to 15% more emotional bandwidth then leads into better business decisions.
Yeah, okay. So the prerequisites then to getting to that position where you know yourself better and you have an understanding for what I suppose those beliefs were, but they're not now hindering you. You can be your authentic self to perform your best. If someone's listening to this and they think, well, how can I start like tapping into that like optimal thinking or knowing myself, where do they begin?
Hmm. I like I like emotional audits. So here's a question I'll ask some of my clients. If there was one negative emotion that we could minimize and just dial down a little bit, that would provide the highest return on investment, which would that be? And because all of my clients are all in business, they like that word. Ooh, what would provide the highest return on investment? You know what? Anxiousness or overthinking. Tell me more about that. And then they'll go, well, I overthink a lot. A lot of my decisions, I could be operating a hell of a lot faster, a lot less emotionally. Okay, what comes up? Sometimes it's fear of failure, it's fear of judgment, it's fear of what. Okay, and then we work on that and we start there. And then when we shift that, they feel better. But then they spot something else. They're like, no, I'm less anxious. Now I'm more angry. Yeah, what's been going on? I realize I've been snapping at people. How long has this been going on? Maybe like 3 years. Okay. So what if we brought that down? I'd have more energy. I'd be more happy. So they're quite subtle shifts and adjustments. But then I'm also looking at the opposite of, well, if I shift that, what might they lose?
This is what I was going to ask because I feel many people who are high achievers sometimes don't want to do the work on themselves because they're worried about what will happen, what they'll lose.
Yeah, it happens all the time, right? And it's like, what is your primary psychological fuel source? Like that's really the question. Is it darkness, scarcity, not enoughness? It's great when you're starting out. It's really, really powerful. It enables you to do shit that you just can't usually do to get to a certain level, right? But then you get the glass ceiling and then you hit a plateau. And dark energy is not going to help you break through that plateau. If anything, it's going to keep you stuck, anxious, and burnt out. And then you're looking at more light energy, abundance, fun, creativity, joy, doing shit because you want to do it because it's a fun thing to do. So some people will never be able to crack out of that dark energy because it makes them feel safe and they've built their whole career of success on that energy alone. Thus, they just can't fathom the idea of taking a risk to try something new.
Isn't that a bit unhealthy to stay in the dark energy for a very, very long time?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. But then also, it can't also just be love, light, and abundance. Dark energy is a good thing. You need a little bit of dark energy every now and then. When you're pissed off with something, that's actually when you're often at your most creative. That's where you start to spot ideas. That's where you start to spot opportunities. So it's not you go from like, fuck you, I'm going to prove you wrong to I'm so love, light, and abundance. Like, da, da, da. It's not that. It's hang on. There are times when you need to channel that little bit of fuck you. And then there are times when you go, you know what? It's not even worth my time and energy. Like, it's cool. So it's certainly not healthy, but I'm sure you'd agree we don't exactly live on a healthy planet given the way that most humans fire. But from a performance standpoint, that's where if you can tailor with the two, with the dark and the light, and you can realize, oh, I've hit this plateau and it's not going to take me any further. Okay, well, maybe I need to start playing with a different idea. Maybe I need to start playing a different game. Well, then that's where more fun starts to happen.
Is there a way that you help your clients to visualize this, for instance? Because what we're talking about, I'm thinking you've got certain gears, maybe you've got certain colors, maybe you're a certain superhero, because you have like this awareness of, okay, am I in my dark energy now? Am I in my like, oh, I'm doing this because life is light and all good and positive. But then it must feel like you have to play a certain character at different times. And is that something that you help your clients discover?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll give an example. There are parts of you that are helpful. There are parts of you that are unhelpful. So I will share 3 versions of Kyran that are helpful and unhelpful. So there's council house Kyran, who grew up in a council house. He's a grafter. He's rough and tough. You know, he's spitting on a sawdust boxing gym. Like, come on, he'll just work and he'll work and he'll work and he's relentless. He's in your face. He's an intense guy. Then what I call is flow Kyran. So this was a guy in software sales. When I was in my software sales career, when I was pitching, it was effortless. That same guy comes out when I'm coaching my clients one-to-one. It's effortless. I don't even have to think. I just go in. Now, the downside of flow Kyran is he loves being in this state so much, if he's not aware, he'll burn himself out, because he could do that all day long if he could. And then we got Mountain Eagle Kyran. So Mountain Eagle Kyran is the version of me that can see the 10,000-foot view. He knows when to deploy. Actually, you need to pull your pants up and get back into Counterhouse Kyran, or knows actually I need to go into Slick Flow Kyran. Actually, I need to just stay at that height. You know, my spirit animal was an eagle, because eagles, they soar. If they float down and an enemy attacks it, it just soars back up into an altitude upon which it can't, the enemy that's attacking it can't have the oxygen, so they just dies on its back. It spots its objective, it flies in, takes it, and then gets out. And I like spending more time there. Now, Mountain Eagle Kyran will stop me from getting burnt out. It will help me see what am I actually working on and what is the point strategically of anything that I'm doing. But it also just slows these two guys down. And then there's moments where Mountain Eagle Kyran goes, actually, Council House Kyran needs to bite down on his gum shield and get more shit done here. And I don't care how tired you are, that's what needs to happen right now. So I use this with clients where they have their own versions, because at first I would have said, I don't want to be Council House Kyran anymore, he's really bad. Actually, there is some good. So learning to accept the shadow parts of you, learning to accept the dark parts of you, because they have real positive qualities when harnessed correctly in the right way. That is true self-acceptance. That is true self-love. That enables you to move through life in a much more easy way. Whereas, Slick Flow Kyran, like, he just burns himself out, like, we got to get rid of him. No, that's a creative, effective dude. So I don't want to just be Mountain Eagle Kyran. Otherwise, I'm not going to get anything done. So I use those, whether you call them archetypes, whether you call them, I don't like the word personas, because a persona is something like you put on, but just various different parts of your psyche and your soul that you can step into and then go, all right, time to fucking fuck shit up. Or actually, now's the time to just slow down and take that long view, or just get creative, just flow with it. That makes sense.
100%. And I adore that, because becoming or befriending the shadow parts of you means that they're no longer shadows, because you see them as friends or your superpowers in a way. And that circles back round to us speaking about ADHD, because as much as, yes, there might have been a struggle or suffering to understand, it also gives you so much of who you are and your superpowers. And to anyone who's listening and feels like they're fighting parts of themselves and they'd like to befriend those parts, how can they begin?
Well, just start talking to it. What do you mean talking to it? What is it? What do you mean? If there's a part of you don't like, get a piece of paper and just draw its shape, and then write down its age, like any age that comes to mind. It might be 9, it might be 22, it might be 30, doesn't matter. Just write down its age, and then look at its color. What color is it? Is it red? Is it black? Is it white? It doesn't really matter what. And then just have a dialogue with it. Write with your left hand. Or if you're left-handed, write with your right hand, your weaker hand. Because that simulates writing as a child. Because you're more vulnerable and you don't know what you're doing. And just see what it has to say. And just have a little dialogue. And just write down, okay, like I feel scared, or I feel angry, I feel upset, I feel disconnected, I feel alone, or whatever. And just start this dialogue and just start to see, okay, like this part of me is a part I've rejected. And then start asking it questions. What does it need? How can I help you? And as you start to build that relationship with this little part, I mean, you can't journal or podcast your way to a formidable mind. Like, go and find an expert that you trust. Go and look around. It might take you some time, but go and find someone that you connect with and go, right, I got this part of me and I know it's not helpful and I've probably been judging myself a little bit too harshly. Can you help me? And speak to someone, and they will help you unpack that part and just shave off so much time and so much energy that it will be just struggling by yourself. So that's what I'd say.
With this, I suppose, befriending parts of yourself, maybe even inner child work, there's a lot of visualization that is required for that. I struggled with that for a long time, to be able to kind of sit down and speak to a younger version of myself, because it felt a little bit unnatural. I don't know whether there's different tools or techniques that you suppose people could do if they're trying to be able to lean on parts of themselves, whether this is their future version or their past version that you could advise.
Um, I mean, I couldn't address my shadow parts without someone else
Mm.
because when I first saw them, I denied them and I was like, "Don't! I want to destroy this thing. I want to kill this thing. It shouldn't be alive. Like, I just want to kill it." I couldn't do that. It's not to say that other people can't do that, but my experience is those dark parts of you, you don't really want to go near them.
Could you acknowledge it by yourself, or did it take working with someone
No,
else?
it took working with someone else.
Mm.
I didn't realize how much I loathed myself. Like, I really didn't realize that until I started speaking it aloud to my first ever coach and therapist. Like, fuck, man, I just couldn't. I just thought that was normal. I thought it was just like, surely everyone hates themselves this much, right? And that's where it was. So I wouldn't have had the consciousness. I'm a guy that's been journaling since he's a teenager, like I wouldn't have been able to have cracked that open. I've read a lot on psychology and I've always been fascinated by that. So I don't think it's possible. But then I also have the other belief, which is anything's possible. But I just think it's a hell of a lot harder. It's like trying to build Lego without the instructions. It's like you've got simple Lego, and then you've got, I don't know, the Burj Khalifa Lego set. That's going to be a lot more complicated to build. So I think just hiring an expert. But then I think like this with everything. I've got a very extensive experienced team in any endeavor that I'm fascinated by. I just bring in the experts and I go, right, teach me everything. Treat me like a blank canvas. I'm going to try and suspend my judgment and I'm just going to try what you tell me. Done it for training, nutrition, psychology, business, bloody sleep, tried that, you know. So I always just think hire an expert because they'll be able to get you there faster.
And you have no idea what you don't know. And when someone is able to ask questions that you couldn't think of, and now ChatGPT probably couldn't think of those, although that is something that feel more people are leaning on now. It's okay, let me get ChatGPT to assess my situation, but it has nothing in comparison to an experienced expert who has seen cases time and time and time again. With the journey or the trajectory that you found yourself on, getting to know and understand yourself more, maybe someone's listening to this and they are on that side of, I want to optimize my mind to be the 1% and to be able to squeeze all the juice out of my mind. Then someone might be listening who's never once in their life had a therapy session. Where do they start on that spectrum?
Okay. The therapy spectrum, you point that way, that's where I'm pointing on the camera. Yeah. Well, start with a book called Somebody Should Have Told Us by Jack Pransky. It's one of the best pieces of writing on thinking ever. Ever. And what you will learn is that everything that happens in life that is an issue isn't the issue, it's your thinking towards the thing that's the issue. You suffer more in your thought about the thing than the actual thing itself. So that's a really good book just to fuck with your head a little bit and fuck with your thinking to go, maybe reality isn't as I perceived it.
Good start.
Yeah, that's like a way of. But then the problem is I'm not a gentle, feely guy. I'm very direct, and that's why my clients seek me out because I ask this question to every single one of my clients. Do you want some feedback with a feather, or do you want it with a sword? And all of my clients pick the sword, and I can just go bang, right? That's how I work. So I'm not really a good coach or mentor for everyone. I'm quite like specific, so that's why I'm finding it quite hard to answer the question for someone that's never considered any therapy or whatever. Like even that book, Reflecting Aloud, is actually quite intense. It's a short book, but it's an intense book.
But with that being said, though, if you're going to do it, and we're talking baptism of fire to get to know yourself sooner rather than later, to understand how the mind works, surely whether you do it by the sword or the feather, the outcome is going to be the same. So why does it matter which route you take?
Well, it depends on whether you can handle the sword.
Mm.
I've been told, give me the sword. I've given it, and they couldn't handle it. They get very angry, upset, how dare you, or afraid, or they just completely shut off because it was too intense. So I'm a sword player. I like being a sword player. It's good fun. And also my clients are sword players. They live in a world where, the consequences of their business, or, they're former athletes, it's like shit or bust, like you got to make it work. So not everybody's ready for the feather. Not everybody's ready for the sword, but I do add an extra one in, which is somewhere in between, which is like a rubber mallet. I'm going to dink you around the head. It's going to hurt, but it's not going to be like the sword.
I was thinking toothpick.
Toothpick. Toothpick, yeah. Maybe even my rubber mallet's quite intense.
I find that really interesting because you naturally, I suppose, get an insight into my mind there. Like, why would you want to be given feedback by a feather? Why?
Well, that's because you're sat on this side, because you're always looking for the extra 1%.
But
You're like, don't sugarcoat this. Just smack me around the face. Give me what I need,
But that's why it's fascinating, because like you're opening my mind to, I suppose, everyone needs coaching in a different way, or is ready, has a different capacity for something. But let's say that we're having many of those sword players listening right now. If they were to go in with that book, then if they hadn't done any therapy, they might be thinking perhaps the reason why they might not have done therapy is because they don't know why they need therapy, or should they have therapy. But this is, I suppose, where you don't know what you don't know comes in.
I don't know if this is a controversial belief or not, but I actually don't believe that A players need therapy, because often the problem that they're experiencing, whilst therapy would help, the feedback I get is, I never felt connected to my therapist. I went to therapists and they didn't get me, because it's often about loving yourself and you're enough as you are. You don't need all of this stuff. But there is a subsect of the population where they're so damn fucking ambitious. And it's not only because they're not enough, it's just the way that they're wired and they want to go after big stuff, that they often get frustrated with therapists and counselors because it's too fluffy and soft and going round in circles. That's the feedback that I get from my clients. A lot of people come to me after spending years in therapy and going, I haven't quite got what I need. But I walk the line between coach, mentor, and therapist. So there'll be moments when I'll use therapeutic tools to unlock limiting beliefs, but then there'll be moments where I go mentor mode and be like, right, don't do that. That's a dumb idea. Here's why. And that's where I don't think those A players are going to respond very well to therapy. Now, there are other people, or general population, that therapy is a miles better course of moving forward. Also, sometimes I get A players that are having serious mental health issues, and therapy can help. Now, with my understanding of therapy and the work that I've done, both as a client as a therapist, I can help them not self-destruct their businesses if they are in a real mental health slight.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably the main challenge. You've probably had lots of people on this podcast that have never been to therapy. I don't need it, because they just can't connect with that world. Now, the tools upon which there is therapy, yeah, I think everyone could use those, but I don't always think it's the best construct for those high performers, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. What you've so well explained is that there's different buckets that we can tap into depending on what the needs are. Because I've experienced it firsthand. Therapy has got to the point where it just feels like ruminating about childhood, and it's like, why do we just keep talking about this? And then when you say you've got an element of direction, leadership, like coaching, don't do that. Do this thing instead, and let me tell you why. You trust me? Like, let's go. And that's quite nice. So I suppose,
would you like an example?
Yeah, I would.
All right. One of my clients, he really driven guy. He's built businesses, he's lost businesses, he's won, he's lost. He's had this pattern where he becomes successful and then it all goes wrong, and he becomes successful and it all goes wrong, and he can't quite figure out why rubber can't hit the road, right? So he come to me and he's like, look, I'm doing all right now, and I'm really afraid I'm going to hit the same cycle where big booms in business, big busts in business, big booms, big busts, right? And he spent a lot of time in counseling and therapy, and it helped him, but he kept going through these booms and busts in businesses, and he couldn't figure out what it was. So there was a moment where I realized he was so stressed and anxious and overwhelmed, and he was drinking a lot. And I said, tell me about this drinking thing. And he's like, well, yeah, I guess I do what everyone else in this business does, is we go out, we have drinks, we go watch the football, we do this, we do that, I said, okay. Have you ever had a time off of the booze? He went, yeah, 9 months. I said, what happened? Yeah, my business went bang. And I said, okay. And then what happened? I started drinking again, and then things started to slow down. But then I stopped drinking, but then it got worse. How long did you stop drinking for? Probably like a month, right? And you started drinking again? Yeah. And then it went, pff. And I said, okay, just don't drink. And a therapist wouldn't necessarily say, don't drink. They would say, well, have you considered not drinking? What are the upsides? What are the downsides? What are the opportunity costs? And he's like, I can't do that. And I said, well, maybe we'll have to end the coaching. And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, if you're serious about building a business and making a hell of a lot of money, you're going to have to make changes that you're deeply uncomfortable with. So at the end of the day, with my extensive experience, I know that when clients take out alcohol for a sustained period of time, not a couple of months, but a year to two, whilst they get their life back on track, when they do go back to drink again, it's like a sprinkle. They don't need it. Your problem is you can't get out of this cycle. And then I said, look, I'll give you 2 weeks and you can decide whether you want to continue or not. 2 weeks went by. He got wankered a week after that. And then he come back.
The last hurrah.
And then he was like, yeah, maybe unconsciously. And then he went, all right, I see your point. And I said, okay, we can continue down the process. Because if you hadn't, I'd have sent you a refund for the rest of your program and you'd have been gone. Guy's crushing it. Now his problem is he's built quite a large following off the back of some of his work. And he's got more money. So now he's got more distractions. Because now people are inviting him out for events abroad and these podcasts, and he's now really skyrocketed. And now it's like, well, hang on. Now you got more opportunities. Now you got more distractions. So now I'm teaching him the part of the reason why you weren't able to sustain it was because you weren't able to handle the next level of money. So now he's got all of this money. I've been teaching him to actually making money as offense, keeping money as defense. You need to up your defense. Where's your financial director? Where's your accountant? Oh, I don't really use them. I was like, fucking use them. Send me a financial report every Monday. I get a financial report and I can see he's doing the work and he's got it going. So I've kind of old manned him out of this, right, dude, if you really want to build this business away you go, that's not going to happen with a therapist. So that kind of gives you a real life, an extreme example of boom and bust, but it gives you an example of, well, no wonder these A players are struggling with therapy to a degree because they don't have somebody just going, that's not good enough. Now, when we're going in, and this is what I always say, I'm not saying you're not good enough. I'm saying this standard isn't good enough. And if we need to unpack some emotional stuff, which we did, and we did some inner child work to understand, well, why did he lean on alcohol and all this stress and anxiousness? And there was an undealt with grief going on as well that he'd never addressed before. Once we let that go, now the guy, he has a drink maybe every 3 or 4 months, like a big wedding for when he's the best man, and that's kind of it. And now he doesn't want to go back because he's looking at all of his success. He's looking at all of his progress. And he's like, I don't want to go back to boom and bust. I feel a hell of a lot better. And actually those insecurities that used to lead me to drink and that stress and that grief, I just don't have it anymore. So that's like a real world example of the difference between the two, I would say.
I'm very glad to hear that he had you in his corner because it sounds like he's doing a hell of a lot better. I've been in that position where I've looked back at years where I've been speaking to a therapist, years. Been like, why the fuck didn't they say anything to me? Why didn't they tell me to get myself out of that situation?
But that's also not their job.
I know.
So their job is well-being, mental health. They have a different set of parameters and guidelines. I couldn't do that with an alcoholic. It wouldn't work. If I did that with an alcoholic, that wouldn't work, and that'll actually leave them in a place of disharm, So they have a different set of parameters. So this is why you, as an A player that's getting really frustrated at this world of you're okay, you're enough, you're lovable, let this go, just breathe. Do you really need all these extra things? Do you really want to go out? All of that. The reason you're getting frustrated in that world is because you got no one going, if you want to do something, get in or get out. But on my side, there's a high level of filtration that needs to happen right at the beginning, because that approach won't work for everyone. Sometimes clients come to me with this, I'm ready for that. And I hit them with that. And we quickly realize, very quickly we go, you're not a sword player. And I can play the feather. And sometimes I kind of go more between the feather and the rubber mallet in the short term to get them to the place where they can start playing in the sword. I have to be particularly interested in the client. Go, well, what project are you working on? Does that fascinate me? And actually, could you be a sword player or not? I grew up in a world of sword play with boxing and software sales, which is if you drop your hand, you're going to get knocked out. Or if you don't hit your targets, you're going to get fired. So I'm used to the sword player world, and so are my clients. So that's, if you try and play with a sword with clients that aren't ready, and this is where I see a lot of generic mindset coaches do that, they cause more damage, they cause more harm on someone just because they can't actually read the room as to, because the number one rule of therapy is first do no harm.
Mm. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, where you might have seen someone put someone at a disadvantage because they haven't truly understood what their capacity is at that point in time?
Yeah, this is quite trigger warning on the story. This guy, I think you know him, and I'm not going to tell you who this is afterwards because it was a private conversation that came to me through one of my coaches. So this person had experienced child abuse, like sexual child abuse, and this person said to them, "Yeah, but that's just not you anymore. Like you've got to grow out of that and just accept that you're not that person anymore, and you can choose to continue down this story or not." What do you think that did to that person?
It must have made them suppress a lot of pain that they needed to address. And gosh, it's such a horrible thing to hear.
There's such a level of narcissism in what happened there, such a level of disdain and lack of training that just wasn't acceptable. The same person started boasting on podcasts. People tell me about being raped and like wanting to kill themselves. Don't know why they keep telling me, but yeah. It's just like, so that there's a direct example of trying to use the sword in a moment when not to use the sword.
Yeah.
So this is where I can get quite angry with the air quote mindset world, because I don't think that word means anything. Is as fun as as I play in Swordland, I also know very quickly when something's in front of me, which is, this isn't sword territory, this is feather territory. So let's go and find a specialist feather territory therapist to help this person overcome that,
Mm-hmm.
So that's an extreme example, but there's lots of little t trauma versions of that too, which is also why change doesn't stick.
But even when we talk about the little t trauma, it's perception for what that person has gone through. Because even though we might call it a little t, to them it might be the biggest t in the whole world. And
Correct. Yeah.
it depends on, and sometimes I feel like, whether it depends who's judging, but my big T, I kind of see it as a little t. And this is where you have to find the person that matches or is able to understand what your needs are. For those who would like to have resources and individuals to go through, I mean, of course, it's great that we've got you here, but what would you say you would need to be looking for when it comes to accreditations, or is it client testimonials? Like, how do you know who to trust?
It's really difficult. So first things first, have you got a direct referral? Like, oh, I heard Jimmy went to this guy. Ask Jimmy. Hey, Jimmy, like you did some mind work, or I heard you went to a therapist. What was your experience? And just ask. And what you'll be really surprised is a lot of people will share more about what they were working on than you think, and you start to realize you're not alone. So always look for referrals. Is there anyone that you know? If it's any of your client base, you probably got a couple of referrals for, actually, this person's quite good. You should go and speak to them, right? If you can't find a referral, there's a lot of therapists and coaches and mentors on podcasts just like this one. So if you see one that you like, maybe just have a listen to some of their podcasts. It's always better if they're the guest, unless it's a solo podcast, because then you can really understand them, and just pick up a feel for that person. I don't believe in the old school dogmatic church world of therapy, which is like, it's like Christianity is the way, Judaism is the way, Islam is the way, or CBT is the way, or I don't know, you got all the various different ones, right? It's just like, this is the dogmatic approach of this is how we work. Psychotherapy is the way, counseling is the way, it's CBT, it's NLP, it's the, like, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The number one predictor of success is the relationship between the practitioner and the client, not necessarily the approach. Now, there are certain approaches that the data shows there is slightly more chances of success in certain problems, of course. But if the person that's administering that you just don't connect with or feel safe with, it's just never going to work. So I don't think it's, one thing I will say is just be mindful of anyone that's like, I'm a mindset coach. All right, tell me more about that. Where have you studied? Oh, well, it's all based off my experiences. Don't get me wrong, I'm not discrediting experience. But if it's like, okay, well, other than your experience or your winning lottery ticket numbers or having a good mindset, like, do you have a process? No, I don't have a process. I just rock up and off it goes. It's like, okay, because there's a lot of people on the internet that are very noisy and they have big followings and they call themselves like, oh, mindset, whatever, guru, I'm the mindset soldier, I'm the mindset queen or king or whatever. It's like, okay, well, what's your process? Like, how do you work? Oh, I just sort of just deal with it. It's like,
Yeah.
you know,
There's a lot of cowboys in this industry. Like, I know firsthand what you're explaining is completely correct. And as you say, listening to, I think, strategy, knowledge, information, depth, experience, all of those things are really important. I find it interesting that you say about the relationship that you have, that you feel like safe and understood. I also feel like there needs to be a, correct me if I'm wrong, but there has to be an element of almost emotions associated with importance. If when you're having a relationship with someone, and I found this before with different mentors, if I feel comfortable enough to explain what I'm struggling with, but also a little bit nervous because it really matters to me or I haven't spoken about it before, then that's kind of the right way that I probably should be feeling.
yeah. Well, again, it depends if it's a therapy conversation or if it's a performance conversation. If it's a performance conversation, it's going in with an open mind, like, ah, what is the next level? What could that be? If it's a case of I'm in a therapy place of I'm really not well or I really know that there's something wrong, then yeah, it's going in and having those conversations. Now, in the A player sword wielding world, status, ego, and importance is often very important to these people.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you don't respect that person, or if you don't see something in them where it's like, oh, they can teach me something and then they're going to handle my bullshit, a little nervous, like, oh, wow, then it's never going to work. And a lot of people go with a cheap option. And when they go with the cheap option, they kind of know deep down they don't fully respect who's sat in front of them. And then they never quite get the result that they need. Because I always think if you've got the right person and the right process and the right price is, does it scare you? Doesn't mean you can't pay your rent, but is it a number that makes you go, ooh, okay, I'm going to sit up now. And that's going to drive my attention to implement and get the most out of this. When you're operating out of those three places, that's how you tend to get the most out of who you've got in front of you.
I think we've just created a fantastic recipe for those who want to get the very most out of the way that they think, or knowing themselves, optimizing everything. So, Kyran, thank you. Where can everyone go and find you?
Pleasure. So, where can everyone find me? If you head to www.kyranoneill.com, KYRANONEILL, I'm sure we'll put a link in the
I'll
description.
put it all in the
Yeah.
description box.
You can find me there, or you can find me on Instagram at Total Mental Performance, and I'll put my email in there because sometimes people want to get in touch and they're nervous. Oh, is something going to come through to Kyran's team or whatever? Just drop me an email and I'll personally take a look if there's anything I can do to help or point you in the right direction.
That's really valuable. Thank you, Kyran. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
If you found that episode eye-opening, then you definitely need to go and listen to episode number 14 with Charlie Johnson, a multi-millionaire's cheat codes to success. 5 years ago, Charlie Johnson was just an estate agent, selling houses and chasing commissions. Fast forward 5 years later, and he has sold over $10 million worth of programs online. It is an incredible listen, and I know that you'll love it.